So, first thing I want to talk about is a few channel updates. So I have a new camera. It is a proper camcorder with a viewfinder rather than just a sort of old regular camera that I've been using. So that should help out a bit. I've had comments that when I was talking about swords and stuff, people couldn't always get a good image of what I was showing. So hopefully now having this wonderful viewfinder, I'll be a little better at that than when it was just a shot in the dark. So yes, first off, new tech, new camera. I have a proper tripod rather than just stacking a bunch of books on my desk until it's about the right height. So yes, first things first, channel updates. So hopefully this new tech will help out. And now my actual video is about how we talk about history. For those of you who know, and those of you who don't, hi, this is my channel, but I tend to talk about, history stuff, particularly, Dark Agey, early medieval, Viking Age, and, and earlier type stuff. And, yes, it's just sort of a kind of more relaxed, more casual version of, the History Channel, almost, or Old School History Channel when it did history. Where I'll just talk about, this is how swords were used, this is what this thing looked like, this is, etc., etc. And I like to think it's rather informative. I tend to give very crude citations, this document says this happens in this poem, etc., etc. But it's nothing that we would really consider formal. You wouldn't want to cite one of my videos on, an academic paper or something, just because it's too casual almost. I don't have quite the proper citations that you would expect to have in an academic paper. And I don't, give out my full credentials, which I don't really have, by the way. I'm still an undergrad student. So you wouldn't cite me. But what you might cite is this, which is my paper that I had published in one of my university's publications, the Trident, which is a small publication that is run by our Ancient, Medieval, and Renaissance Studies program. And yes, it's just a short article. I think it's under 1,000 words, actually. That sounds rather short now that I think about it. Perhaps it's longer. But, it's very short. I think it was about 2 full regular pages. And it's all about, fighting in pre-Viking Ireland. When I say pre-Viking, I mean specifically sort of pre-Viking, post-Roman. So, my usual favorite talking point, Ireland from about 400 to 800. And it's all about how, they did have chainmail, they did have longswords, they did, fight in big formations with campaigns, and all that stuff that the academic community is generally beginning to accept they did, when traditionally it had been thought that they had, the traditional really short dagger-like swords, and they didn't wear armor, and they just did cattle raiding and stuff rather than these big campaigns. And I have talked about that in my videos a few times. The chainmail one, I have a few videos about that. And I have a video about how the Irish swords at the time weren't actually that short compared to, the other swords being used. And they definitely weren't daggers. At least most of the time they definitely weren't daggers. So it's the same, information in my article that I would give in one of my videos. You might say, aha, well, perhaps, but, this paper you could cite. It's, definitely if you went to my university, you could just pick up a copy of this, and, it has my citations in there, it's official and all that. And if you don't go to my university, I've happily uploaded it to the internet, so in the link down below, I'll have a link to my academia site, which now has one paper, which is this one. So you might say, well, it's because citations. This one has nice proper citations, whereas my YouTube videos, I just sort of say, the Book of Kells says this image, or something like that. This also doesn't have great citations, actually, because it's just a small university-run publication. We have a few in-text citations, where it just has, the author's name and the title of the work. And that's for modern pieces. When I reference an older piece, like, say, the satires, it just says, open parentheses, satires, close parentheses. It doesn't tell you what translation I was using. Doesn't even tell you who it was written by, Juvenal, by the way. And same thing, once I have, all my Irish ones, it just says the War of Fergus and Concobar. It doesn't have, again, what translation I was using, what version it's from, because in some sources, like the Tain, or the Tain Book Colunga, which I'm probably mispronouncing, there's, I think, 2 different versions of it from the manuscripts, and they're actually pretty different in terms of, how much detail they give to the equipment of the warriors, and stuff like that. It's very different. So knowing, which manuscript you're looking at is definitely going to change it. That doesn't happen in this. Also, it's only the in-text citations. They don't have a nice bibliography or works cited at the end. So the citations aren't actually that much better. So it has the same information, presented in the same way, by the same person as my YouTube channel, but one of these is official, one of these isn't. And I'm not a big fan of that. Partially because, this is becoming a bigger thing in the historical community of, sort of fan research, almost. Like I said, I'm still just an undergrad. I have no credentials. Nothing fancy. I'm not even an upperclassman yet. But I have opinions that are getting published and being used out there, which is the exact same opinions I'm getting out on my wonderful YouTube channel, which all of you watch and presumably love. If not, I imagine you wouldn't be watching it. And that's just this. And there's all sorts of other great sources for this. So a lot of, wargaming rules and stuff like that will do a lot of research. So, for instance, I made my own wargaming rules fairly recently, a few months ago. I've been testing out with a few friends at my university, and I did some research into it. I had to look up, about how many people would be in a decent-sized warband, what sort of weapons would they use, who could afford what, and, all that sort of stuff. So I had to do a decent bit of research, and especially if you look online, there'll be a bunch of, other Dark Age places that put basically papers that are a few pages long, that give sort of very broad, very general overviews of warfare at the time, so you know what to do when you're playing with those rules. And they have good information, but it's not information we could use. Same thing with reenactment groups. One of the best, most in-depth, most detailed works on Viking Age armor is from the Vikings reenactment group. So they don't really cite sources, they don't really do anything that official, because it's not, a full-on academic paper. It's a resource that reenactment group published to help their members in sort of a more casual way. But it has some of the best information on Viking Age chainmail that I can find. And if I can find that link again, I'll put that in the description below as well. So again, it's this great wellspring of information we can't use. One of the best researchers I could find online was, I believe his name was Mac Wilson, and he ran the Bedonicus WordPress for a while, which was all Arthurian and, sort of that general period British history in just a WordPress blog. He did a decent job of citing his sources, if I remember correctly, and I wish I could put a link to that in the description, but unfortunately he stopped writing and he took down the website. But while it was still around, the best information I could find most of the time, and I would go and fact check it every once in a while if it struck me as kind of weird, and I don't think I ever found something that made me think, oh yeah, he was definitely wrong. So again, it's all of these great new information, your great new sources of information now that we have access to the internet, which is one of the best thinking machines, one of the best libraries around, because it can access just about anything. And we don't use it as much as academics, because we still are stuck in this mindset of, this source of information is official. The source that you're watching now, which has the same sort of information, the same styles of citation, and, just the same viewpoints. It's basically the same, but one of which you'll say you can cite for an academic paper, one of which you won't cite for an academic paper. And I don't like this, because again, you have this abundance of information, but you're being told you can't use it. That's a problem. We, sort of as the academic community, we need to catch up to this at some point. Where you can just, we need to realize that people, especially, people my generation and a bit older, who have sort of grown up with the internet and can tell a bit more between, and can tell really well between, this is a very nice, thought out website, and this one's, something somebody threw together really quickly thinking Braveheart was a really good academic source. So as people become more tech literate and can recognize which websites to trust, which is happening now, we should be able to do stuff like that, to look at, more sort of casual internet information. Like the Thane Thrand YouTube channel and a few others do a bunch of tests on how do swords perform against armor. That sort of stuff isn't really as explored in traditional academic routes. You don't have, a history scientist basically sitting in a lab hacking at something with a sword. That's people like Thane Thrand and various other reenactors who just get a sword and do it and videotape it. And it's generally would be frowned upon if you tried saying, based off of this one guy in Texas's YouTube videos, these swords were really effective against armor. People wouldn't like that, even though it's one of the best resources we have on how Viking Age swords would have worked, because it's a Viking Age sword being tested. So that's just sort of it. We as an academic community need to catch up to the technology and start finding more ways to have these sort of less official internet channels of information be taken as seriously as something published in paper. Thanks for watching.